give a big round of applause for my daughter, Miss Madness. All right? This is very interactive. There's microphones set up. If you have questions for the man, please line up. We'll make sure we get them all in. I got some questions. We're going to go deep in wrestling nerd history today, and I cannot wait. So let's bring them out. Ladies and gentlemen, the greatest heel in pro wrestling, the $1 Million Man, Ted Dibiase.
Everybody's gonna pay.
Yes!
Always!
Make some noise! Rock the Have a seat. Now that's an entrance. Absolute honor, Mr. Dibiase. Thank you for coming to Saskatoon. No stranger to Saskatoon, though. You've been here a few times over the years on the road. Any memories of Saskatoon or just this prairie stretch in general?
It's kind of like back when we were wrestling, and it was kind of like, it's so different because we were on the road all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, all the time. One town after another, and so after a while, it just kind of all ran together. But I've always loved coming to Canada. The fans are some of the greatest, it's kind of like Bret Hart's from Calgary.
Yep.
Like me, he grew up in a wrestling family, and so Bret and I have that to share. And I love the guys. I think he's a great guy from a good family.
Were you in Saskatoon in '92 when Bret Hart won the world title for the first time?
I believe I was.
Yeah?
Yes.
Any memories from that night?
Well,
the boys happy for him?
I mean, it's like when you wrestle every day, it's hard to pinpoint this one match. Now, I remember when Bret and I got to wrestle each other, and I remember that was like, it was at a TV that they were doing, and they used to do these matches where they would, they put you out there, and it was for Coliseum Video or something like that. Well, Bret and I went out, again, both being the sons of professional wrestlers and growing up in the wrestling industry. And then when we came out, when we had the match and we did like a 20-minute, what we call Broadway, to a draw. And when we came back through the curtain, everyone was like going, gosh, man, that was just great. Like you guys have been working a lot together. And we looked at each other and said, that's the first time we ever touched. And so just, so I have a lot of respect, for Bret.
Nice. Have the good folks of Saskatoon been hospitable? What have they been talking to you about here yesterday and today?
Gosh, everybody's got a price. Even the $1 Million Man, right? I enjoy the fans. I enjoy the cons. It gives me an opportunity to talk to fans and find out what they like. A lot of times it's kind of like, my favorite story about Andre. Andre was this huge man, right? And when he went anywhere, it was hard. It's like hard for him to imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, to sit on an airplane. He couldn't. He would have to take up, like 4 or 5 seats.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I'm like 5'8", I'm uncomfortable on planes. I can't imagine.
Oh yeah, and so it's just but Andre was a great guy. I think a lot of people misunderstood him because, here's a guy who, where could he hide? And there's no place Andre could hide because he was just, such a big guy. But I was with Andre. We had just flown from the United States to Japan. That's a it's a 14-hour flight. You know, and so we dropped our bags, and you know, and we're all gonna go get something to eat, you know, and so I hit the button, you know, I dropped my stuff in my room, I hit the button, the elevator door opens, and just Andre, hey boss, let's go eat. And so as we're going down, the elevator keeps stopping, you know, on these floors, and people keep getting on. Now, we're in Japan. What you and I think is a full elevator, not in Japan. They just pack them on there. And so, you know, but the one thing Andre hates to do is be crowded. And so they get on it. So he reaches over and gives me a tap, and I looked up at him, and he winked. And I said, something's about to happen. And the next thing you heard was the loudest, longest fart that you could ever imagine. I mean, I remember thinking to myself, I know he's a giant, but how could anybody possibly have that much air in their body? And imagine the poor guy that's standing directly behind him. Well, gang, when that elevator door opened, they were tripping over each other to get out. And as it closed again, it's just me and Andre, and all you can hear is Andre going, oh, oh, oh. And I guess they won't grab the big man anymore, will they?
I've always been curious. I've heard little snippets here and there in interviews, but whose idea was the gimmick of the $1 Million Man? Did they come to you and they say, what's your idea for a wrestling character? And you're like, I want to be a guy who's rich, and I have to pretend I'm rich even when I'm not in wrestling, so I have to fly first class and dress in gold for the rest of my life. Was that your idea, or did they come to you with this and you just won the lottery?
I had a meeting with Vince McMahon. Vince, you know, like wanted for me to come on board. He says, Dad, I've got an idea. And everything in wrestling's been done and it's been redone, but this is original, this is fresh, this is new. And he said, I think you're the guy for it. He says, but I can't tell you unless you agree to sign with us. Oh. Because I don't want to give away a great idea. And so I didn't have to think about it very long. And I came back to him and I said, I'm your guy, Vince. And this was on the phone. And I said, so what is it? He says, nope. He says, I'm going to fly you and your wife back up here. And we're going to sit and I'm going to tell you about this personally. And so Donnie and I go to New York and, you know, to Vince's office, you know, over in Stamford, Connecticut. And he says, Ted, he says, the one thing everybody hates, is someone who by virtue of their wealth bullies people. And I started laughing. I said, I can't stand guys like that myself, you know.
He's projecting.
Oh yeah, and so he says, and what we're going to do is, we're to the best of our ability, we're going to make everybody believe you're that guy, because you're going to fly everywhere first class. There's going to be limousine service every time you get off a plane, every time you leave an airport or go to an airport, a hotel to Coliseum, back to hotel. We're going to make everybody believe that you're that guy. And he says, you'll probably be one of the hottest heels we've ever had. And I said, yeah, to the crowd and maybe to the dressing room too. I mean, who else was? The only other guy that was getting that treatment was Andre the Giant. And Hulk Hogan. And so, but you know, it didn't turn out that way, because all the other guys, they looked at it the way I would have looked at it and said, man, that's a great idea. You know, if I ever got that opportunity, I would take it too. You know, so it was unbelievable.
So you're getting treated like a actual millionaire when you're looking at like another guy at the time that just was given a giant scepter with a W on, and they're like, well, you're the warlord. Get out there. You had to keep it up, like in everyday life. I remember seeing you on an actual episode of The Lifestyle of the Rich and Famous. Like they did an episode on you.
Yeah,
like,
they did that. They put me on The Lifestyles of Rich and Famous. The house was Vince's house. You know, of course, everything was, it was just, it was all for show. And I think it's another thing was that guy's, I can't think of his name now. Arsenio Hall, I think I went on his
Arsenio Hall?
Yeah, I kept in character and to the point. So anyway, it's a lot of fun.
Could there be a $1 Million Man character now in 2026? Would it work? Would it be impossible to pull that off with the internet?
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I really don't know. I don't know. And I'm not real familiar, again, with the talent today. I really don't watch a lot of wrestling. Because personally, I can't watch it very long. I mean, especially the guys. The guys go out there and they take all these great bumps and flips and all this other stuff. And they think that's a great match. That's not a great match. You didn't tell me a story. Every wrestling match should tell a story. There's a good guy, there's a bad. And every time you watch a movie, there's a good guy, there's a bad guy. And for establish the good guy first, that he's really good, he can out wrestle you. And then as a heel, you pick your spot and you take over on him. And the rest of the match is the baby face, the good guy, trying to find his way back. And finally, whatever the move is you do, and then this guy, makes this gigantic comeback on you. And then he either wins, or as the heel, and as if you're telling the story and you're going to be wrestling again, then the heel finds another way to cheat and beat you. And of course, it is, the people are happy because they saw him beat the crap out of you, but then now they're left sad because, well, we're going to have to come back and see what they're going to do next. So
I try not to be the old man yells at clouds, grumpy old man when I watch wrestling now, but I'm with you. There's no storytelling. It's move to move to move. And I try not to be that guy, but I can't shake it.
Well, you're right. There's a lot of guys, in the WWE today that they go out there and they do all this fancy stuff, but they're not telling the story. I'll be honest with you, the girls do a better job of telling the story today than the guys do. Mm-hmm. And you know what? If any of you guys out there disagree with me, then I'll take it. You can take it up with me. Yeah, sure, I'm happy to take it up with you. I'll show you where you're wrong.
I was going to tell this story a little later, but it segues perfectly in now. So I started watching wrestling. Like, my friends watched it religiously. I would watch it when I was over at my friend's house. Liked it, aware of it, but I was never at I have to tune in every week until about the summer of '93, just because that was around the time we got cable and I could watch Monday Night Raw in its infancy. So I didn't see this until probably 5-6 years ago. I was in my 30s and I was watching a best of Raw, and there's an episode of Raw, one of the early ones I had never seen, where it was you and IRS as Money Inc. You were tag team champions. This was right before WrestleMania 9. This is what set up WrestleMania 9. I believe you were wrestling Brutus the Barber Beefcake one-on-one, and he had just come back and done this real-life interview about how he was in a boating accident, and he had his face reconstructed. This was real. They had shots of surgery.
That really happened.
Yeah, this was blending reality into a storyline. So he comes back. I think he's wrestling in a face mask because his face is not, has been surgically reconstructed. So of course, IRS hits him with the metal briefcase and gets disqualified, and then you double team him, and the crowd's going crazy. And then the mask comes off, and you hold him with his hands behind his back, and for 3 minutes, they tease IRS hitting this man in the face with this metal briefcase, and it gets to the point where you finally are about to do it, and then your own heel manager at the time, Jimmy Hart, jumps in front and is like, "This is too far, guys." IRS pushes him down, and then they smash him in the face anyway, and he's lying there and he's bleeding, and I'm just, I have seen in the last few years someone put a garbage can on top of their head and do a backflip off the top of a cage, and I barely flinched. Yeah. I'm watching this angle from 1993, and I am leaning forward. I am have goosebumps. I'm you can't hit him, and then you do hit him in the face, and I know it's staged, but I was he's dead. I don't know how you fake that. Like,
Yeah.
And there was just such brilliant storytelling, such emotion,
Yeah.
such crowd manipulation. You guys just pulled it off. And I don't know why that Jimmy Hart, like, good guy face turn isn't talked about more, because that was brilliant timing.
Well, and that, you know, again, I mean, I grew up in wrestling. You know, my father was a professional wrestler, Iron Mike Dibiase, and you know, he had his biggest runs with a guy named Dory Funk Sr. And of course, you know, we were very good friends with the entire Funk family. You know, Dory Jr. and Terry Funk, and they were phenomenal wrestlers. And again, the thing that bothers me about wrestling today is there's no storytelling. I mean, when you watch a movie, you know it's not real. But if the actors in that movie are good at what they do, they draw you into the story they're telling. The bad guy's the bad guy, the good guy's the good guy, and at some point in that movie, the good guy is going to make a big comeback and win. And or if it's a series, you know, the bad guy finds another way to cheat and beat you again, only to set up another match. Mm-hmm. And that's the way wrestling used to be. But you know, now, I mean, I see guys go out there, they take, you know, a triple back somersault off the top rope and land on their feet. So what?
Yeah.
What does it mean? You know, tell me the story. Tell me a good story. The girls in wrestling today tell a better story than the guys.
It takes you out when there's like 7 people standing there waiting while one person gets in position to do a jump. You're like, why don't you get out of the way?
Yeah.
Neither here nor there. How did the team, to go back to Money Inc., how did you and IRS get paired together? Because everybody who grew up just took it for granted. Like, that's the team. It's the $1 Million Man and a guy that, an evil tax man. But it worked so well. It was a great pairing.
Well, I mean, again, it was another, you know, Vince McMahon idea, you know, but it worked. We made a great team. And, you know, Mike's a good guy, too. Yeah, and, you know, and you got to have that, you know, you can put a couple of guys together and they may not, you know, they may not
gel.
Yeah, but we gel very well, and Mike's a great friend of mine to this day.
There's a great YouTube channel or TikTok channel, whatever. I don't know who it is, but it's a guy explaining old 80s wrestling to his girlfriend. And it's really funny because it's just, when you say it out loud like that, he's like, well, that's a millionaire, and he's partners with an evil tax man, and they're dastardly. She's like, okay, you know. And they're like, well, this is Akeem, the African Dream. She's like, what? He's like, don't ask. It'll get taken off YouTube if I try to explain what's happening here. But you came up also like in just, I don't know if it's just because gimmicks were kind of new, but everything in the late 80s, early 90s just was so fresh and colorful. I was telling you backstage, in my basement, Flex here, I have the actual WrestleFest cabinet, and my kids and I play the arcade game of WrestleFest from 1991, and I just can never get over the colors. You have Earthquake, bright blue, you, black and gold, Hogan, yellow, Jake, green. It's just, everybody's colorful, and everybody now is just wearing black, dark colors. And I don't know why there's not, well, they don't go back to that either, because it stands out so much.
Yeah, I don't, like I said, I don't watch enough anymore, because
it's not colorful.
When I watch, it's not colorful, and quite frankly, sometimes I just get bored. I mean, do something. Tell me a story. I mean, it's kind of like watching a movie. Mm-hmm. You know, even a movie that's a series. You know, eventually, okay, you establish the good guys, and then and then the bad guys come along and ruin it, and the rest of the story is about, or the movie is about good overcoming evil. And if it's a series and you're going to keep going on, well, good conquers evil, and then evil does something else, and to be continued. And we used to do stuff like that. You know, it's like, okay, I end up in a lumberjack match with somebody. So all the lumberjacks around the ring, you know, anybody that gets thrown out, the lumberjacks pick them up and throw them back in. Well, it's kind of like, I find a way to win there, because I got somebody working for me on the outside. Well, then the next match, it's a cage match, you know, and you know, the only way to get out of the cage is to climb over the top or go through the gate.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's usually the last one.
You're trying to tell the story to make people come back week after week.
Like a soap opera.
Absolutely. People out there, if you have questions, come up to the mic. I apologize. Tap on it so I know. I'm wearing a wig, sunglasses, and sweating into my eyes, so I won't be able to tell if anybody's there. So just tap and I'll get to you. Here we go. First question. The funnest wrestler you've ever fought. Funnest. Yeah. The opponent you enjoyed wrestling the most.
Wow. You know, that's kind of a hard question to answer when you think about all of the people that I have wrestled. Now, I would say in my early career, when I was becoming wrestler, you know, the one guy that he was a great wrestler, and he was also just a funny guy. His name was Dick Murdoch.
Dirty Dick Murdoch.
Just like me, Dick Murdoch grew up in a wrestling family, and he grew up around the Funk family. And the Funk family has been a part of my life, most of my life. My dad, Iron Mike Dibiase, and Dory Funk Sr., now, I don't know if this has ever even been, I mean, they had a 3-hour and 20-minute Texas death match in Amarillo, Texas in 1969. And it was kind of like, you know, how do you have a match that long? Well, they would take them back to the dressing room, the doctors look them over, they go back, but they legitimately hard-weighed each other. Now, not the entire match, obviously, but, you know, there was a picture of both of them in the paper the next day, and, you know, my dad had this great big eye, and Funk Sr. had, you know, it was all bruised up, and it was kind of like, what they did, though, is they went out there and purposely, and it's like taking one for the business, made this match as real as they possibly could, and the spin-off of that was the wrestling business in that Texas territory was great for, I mean, the longest time. But I mean, that's because you got two guys they're working for the business and not themselves.
I have a couple rumors I want to ask you about, and I'm mad I forgot to bring them out here. Actually, Caitlin, there's a couple action figures in the very back corner, if you can bring them out in the green room. I wanted to ask you about some toys, but I've heard many people say this. I don't know if I've ever heard you say it, but the $1 Million Championship was created because you were originally supposed to win the world title at WrestleMania 4, and instead they gave it to someone else. I can't remember who it was.
Randy Savage.
Yeah! Is that true? They kind of promised it to you, and then Randy threw a fit?
Apparently, but I didn't know about Randy throwing the fit. I mean, they didn't tell me that.
Ladies and gentlemen, Caitlin, by the way. Shoot, that's where you clap. Thanks.
Yeah, so, yeah, I mean, that's where I had thought going into it, you know, and, but what they did with me, in my opinion, actually ended up better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because
your own title, you're rich.
Because if I had, you know, won the title, then I would have the run with Hulk Hogan, and eventually Hulk would beat me, and you know he would be the champion again.
That's it.
So this way, it's kind of like I just turned my nose up and say, you know what, keep your stinking belt. I'll create my own.
LJN rubber action figures. Who remembers these? Who has these? Who's a fan of these? The original, right? I just actually in the last year heard this story. So they licensed these in the late 80s, released them, and in the original deal, the original contract with the talent, they didn't realize how much money was going to go to the actual wrestler and not the company. And I don't know if it was the first wave or the second wave, but we're receiving astronomical royalties from the toy deals to the point where Vince panicked and immediately made everybody re-sign a new contract where you weren't getting quite a highest percentage of sales. Is that true?
Yep.
That's awesome. So, yeah, life was treating you good when those first LJN checks were coming in.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's crazy. What was it like?
Now it's now it's the Funko Pops, right?
Sure.
You know the toys with the got a great big head and a small body, right? You know. That's me.
That's
great
you.
Big head and a small body.
Was it surreal seeing this? Like the first time you had an action figure of yourself? I know you have like 100 now.
I'll be honest with you. I think I was in a Walmart or something with one of my grandchildren, and they called me Big. Big, come here, you gotta see this, and I went over there and I went, what? I didn't even know. I mean, those things came out, and the first time I saw one was in a Walmart.
That's awesome. And then the checks just came and you were like, okay, let's go back to Walmart.
That's fine, yeah. Keep going to Walmart now.
More questions? Love the shirt, by the way.
Oh, thanks. So I loved watching you in Mid-South. One of my favorite things is actually when you finally turn babyface with the Ric Flair angle.
Yeah.
But when Watts sold, or went national, I should say, in the UWF, what were the biggest differences from being regional in Mid-South to going to being national in the UWF? The UWF was great, by the way. I mean, it was a short run, but that was great. I just loved it.
Well, I mean, Bill Watts' territory was what they called Mid-South. And Mid-South was all of Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. That's a big territory. And, that's a lot of room to, you tell stories. I mean, you got different things happening.
I've heard lots of that horror travel stories in that territory. It was absolutely brutal.
I mean, it was the travel. If I'd have been paid by the mile, I'd be the multi-million-dollar man. Yeah, because I mean, a lot of that stuff was, you drive, you're driving your own car. There's, and occasionally Bill would, had a couple of, we'd do a show in Oklahoma City, and then we would be caravanned over to Tulsa. Would have a matinee, and then a show a matinee in Oklahoma City, and then another show at Tulsa that night. Sometimes we'd work four shows in 2 days, and it was brutal, but the money was good.
And did anything change when you went national, like when they became the UWF? Was the travel any better, or was it harsh like that?
Well, I mean, it was still pretty rough, but I mean, if it required flying, then that's when, Bill would, he would pay for us to fly back down. For example, we would start like in Baton Rouge, and everybody, we would fly to wherever the first show was.
Right.
And then he would have cars there to take all the talent to this show, to this show, to this show, this show, and then, and we end up in Tulsa, and then after the Tulsa show, we get on an airplane and are flown back to Baton Rouge, where our cars are, and then off we go again. I mean, we've done we would do 2 shows a day on the weekends. We'd do a Friday night matinee, then we'd do a Saturday, not a Friday night match. A Saturday matinee at 2 o'clock, and then another show that night at 7 o'clock. And then the next day we would do 2 more shows, and then down the road you go. It was brutal.
It was brutal, but that was
the money was good.
And that was one of the best territories to watch. I'm sure even when before the midnight and everybody came in, the Rat Pack stuff and everything like that was just phenomenal. It's one of my favorite territories still to this day to watch.
Well, thank you very much. Well, and I give a lot of that credit to Bill Watts. Bill's a brilliant guy.
Oh yeah.
It's kind of like the only thing everybody wished is that his payoffs were a little better.
I heard that about Bill too.
Yeah.
Great question. Thank you. Deep cut. My questions are all over the place. I'm just asking you my questions in order of actually want to know. Before we get to another fan question, did anyone ever ask you about being one of the original members of the New World Order? I watched all these documentaries about one of the greatest angles in wrestling, and it's like they talk to Hogan, Hall, and Nash, Walton, Bischoff, over and over and over. And then all the footage they show is Hogan walking out with you.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever seen you talk about the early days of the NWO.
Well, hey, you know, I started, yeah, I was there. I was part of the NWO. But the thing was going on in my personal life was, you know, I've been raised a Christian, and, you know, when you live in the wrestling world, a lot of things go astray. And I had just come to a place where I had rededicated my life, not only to my wife, but to my faith. And I told those guys, I said, look, I said, you know, I'm going to be appearing on a lot of Christian television. They're seeing me on a Christian television, and then they're watching the TV, and I'm this horrible heel manager. You know, that's when they decided that they would switch me. And then I went from being the heel manager to the
Steiner Brothers?
The Steiner Brothers, yeah.
Okay.
So
answered that question. Thank you very much. Boom.
Before you got to the WWF, you worked a lot with the Fabulous Freebirds in different territories. What was the craziest thing you did with them, both in and out of the ring? And who should we have leave the room before you answer?
I was going to say there's kids in the audience.
The Fabulous Freebirds, you know, and I'll be honest with you, you know, like that's Terry Gordy and
Michael Hayes,
and Buddy Roberts. Michael Hayes was the mouthpiece, and Michael was really good at that. He wasn't as good performing in the ring as Terry Gordy and who am I talking about?
Buddy Roberts.
And Buddy Roberts. Both of those guys were great, and I love to work with them. But Michael, you know, he had the brain, and he was the guy that was the mouthpiece all the time. And for them, it worked great. And hey, we loved working with those guys. It was almost like a night off.
How was when you and Hayes were going around the country whipping each other with leather belts?
Do what?
You guys had country whipping belt matches, you and Hayes?
Really?
UWF.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, we did a lot of things in UWF, but, you know, it's a different story. I remember some things, and some things I don't remember. Sometimes I can tell you, like even now, you know, something that I've been dealing with. You know, I can remember things I did 30 years ago, and sometimes it's hard for me to remember what I did last week. You know, and you know, it's like it's not like severe brain trauma or whatever, but you know, it's just an issue. You know, sometimes I remember, sometimes I don't, and sometimes if somebody, you know, gives me enough, then I go, oh yeah. So anyway.
Unfortunately, that's just not you, Mr. Dibiase. That's everyone.
Thank you so much. You go to another question? Line forming, I think. I can't tell. Hairs in my mouth, too. This is horrible.
What would you have for advice for aspiring like indie wrestlers just getting in?
Well, you know, for young guys that want to get into the wrestling business, you know, they're all going to probably have to start, obviously, you know, with an indie group. Number one, I would check it out. In other words, some indie groups are very reputable, and some are not. And I would make sure that whoever I'm putting my hat in, putting my body on the line for, knows what they're doing and are reputable. Because if they're not reputable, you know, that they're not going to get you anywhere. But if it's a reputable organization, you know, and we'll say where the WWE, you know, has gone before for talent, you know, that would be, you know, my best advice to anybody that wanted to, you know, get into wrestling. And today, you know, it's not like it used to be. You know, it's it's kind of like I'll be honest with you. I think the girls are directed by Fit Finley. He takes care of the girls, and he's producing. I'll tell you, those girls have better matches than some of the guys.
Yep.
I mean, and I don't know who's running the guys. I mean, who's in charge of training the guys? I don't even know, because I don't. It just anyway.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tell me a Virgil story. Like watching it back in the day, you were cheering him on. Well, you don't know. Virgil was his manager, and you treated him like garbage, and you just waited and waited and waited and waited for Virgil to finally have had enough and turn on you. And like it's just. It's brilliant looking at the time. How long do you go until you finally pull the trigger, knowing he's going to get his moment, but like there's probably not that much for Virgil on the other side of that. Rest in peace, or you know what I mean? Like he wasn't going to turn on you and then start wrestling for the world title. Like,
well, I mean, yeah, and Virgil personally was a real nice guy. But it's kind of like the lights are on, but nobody's home.
huh.
He wasn't the brightest, brick in the wall, And so, I mean, it's kind of like what did he do best?
Yep.
Stand there and look pretty, and I would use him. And we would use him for special spots. But I'm telling you, if Virgil could have been a better wrestler than he actually was, I could have had, oh gosh, because after all the way, I mean, we probably couldn't get away with a lot of the stuff we did with Virgil today.
Nope.
We did back then. But I mean, if we could have, well, I'll tell you who was really good, and I had a great run with Sylvester Ritter, Junkyard Dog. Junkyard Dog was the first African American wrestler to be featured as one of the top stars in a territory, and that territory was Bill Watts. That was Mid-South. And JYD ended up being one of my best friends. He was the best man at my wedding. That's how close we were. And the JYD was really good on the microphone. Oh my gosh. He wasn't as good in the ring, so that's where I had to be, I wanted to be cautious as I wasn't gonna, this is the guy, and again, Bill Watts is the first promoter to ever feature as his top star, a black guy. And he was so over, it was incredible. I mean, and we were really good friends. And so when Bill decided to turn me heel, he says, I'm turning you on the dog. I said, Bill. I said, well, I won't be driving my car to New Orleans anymore. New Orleans, was a hot place. I mean, and 90% of the crowd in New Orleans was black, and they were all JYD fans. And I said, do any of you guys remember who Grizzly Smith was? Yeah. Grizzly Smith was Jake Roberts' dad, but Grizzly Smith had also been a wrestler. He had been in a tag team. I don't know who the other guy was, but Grizzly was kind of like Bill Watts' guy. He's the guy who, was given all the finishes and here's what you're going to do. And if any of the guys needed to get a draw or extra money or something, then they would go to Grizz. And Grizzly Smith is also Jake Roberts' dad. And so, I told Grizz, I said, hey, listen, Grizz, I'm not, I've got a Smokey and the Bandit Trans Am. I said, I'm not driving my car to New Orleans. And he said, why? I said, because when I come out, it'll be on blocks and they will have taken everything, you know. And he says, okay, well, you ride with me then, I'm neutral. Okay. So I ride with Grizz to New Orleans, you know, and I don't know how many people saw me get out of the car and go in the building, you know, with Grizz. Well, me and JYD, you know, we go in and we have a great match, and, you know, he beats the hell out of me, and then I find a way to cheat and win again, and we'll see you next week. So I go back in the dressing room and taking a shower, and I'm getting dressed, and old Grizz comes walking in there, got his hands on his hips, looking at me and shaking his head. I said, what's the matter? Was something wrong with the match? He says, no, the match was great. I said, so what's wrong? He says, my tires. I got 4 flat tires. I said, you see, Grizz, your tires are flat. I wouldn't have had any tires if it had been my car. Yeah, I mean, people took their wrestling real serious back then, so that was one of the funniest things. So I had to get a ride back to Baton Rouge from somebody else.
One more.
Thank you, Mr. Dibiase. Could you tell us a little bit about your athletic background before you were in professional wrestling? Was there anything else that you did?
I grew up in the wrestling business, like I said, because Iron Mike Dibiase was my father. My father was not only a great pro wrestler, he was the AAU National Heavyweight Wrestling Champion when he was in the Navy. And when he got out of the Navy, then he went to the University of Nebraska and lettered 8 times, 4 years in football, 4 years in wrestling. He was an outstanding athlete. And you know, it's like, so that's obviously who was my hero and who I wanted to be just like. But what was I'm sorry?
I actually had a 2-part question. The first part is, was there any other sports that you did? Any other?
Well, yeah. I played football and I never had a chance. When my dad, I went to my freshman year of high school in Nebraska at an all-boy Catholic school, and so I played football for it was Omaha Creighton Prep, and I wrestled for them. And then that summer we went because when my dad saw that I had some football talent, he says, I'm going to go back to Texas, where I always do good business, and put you in a good Texas high school program, because Texas high school football is notorious. And he says, and see how we go. And so we went back to Amarillo, Texas, and he went back to work for the Funks, and he and Dory Funk Sr. had one of the longest, it was a 3.5 hour Texas death match. That was back in '69. But anyway, so we went there, and my dad had a heart attack and died July the 2nd, 1969 in Lubbock, Texas. That forced my family to go back to Arizona, where my mother's my grandparents lived. My grandmother owned and ran a truck stop, one of the hardest working women I ever knew. And so I go back to this little school in Arizona, but I did the best I could do, and you know, I got an offer from the University of Arizona to play football on scholarship. So I'm watching wrestling. One day wrestling comes on. I hadn't seen any wrestling since my father died, and he died in '69. This is '72. And it's the Funks. It's the the same organization where my dad died. They're coming to Tucson, so I went to see the Funks. We've been family friends for years, and so Terry Funk told me, he says, "Hey Teddy, you know what?" He says, "I can get your recruiting trip to West Texas State if you want." He said, "Even if you're going to go to Arizona, take the trip and come see everybody." And so I said, sure, that'd be great. Well, that's all it took, for me to go back to West Texas State, to visit Amarillo and to visit this place where my dad had always done well, with a family that, and I even after having that offer from the University of Arizona, I chose West Texas State over them. And they said, why? I said, I didn't go to West Texas State to become a football player. I went to West Texas State because it's my inroad to pro wrestling. Because one of the greatest wrestling families in the world lived there, the Funk family. And that's how I ended up back at West Texas State. The summer after my junior year of of college, I had an opportunity to go to what was then Mid-South Wrestling, Cowboy Bill Watts, and wrestle. And Dick Murdoch's the guy that told me I could do that, because the NCAA, you used to have a rule where if you competed professionally in any sport, you lose all amateur status. Then they changed it and they said, well, if you compete professionally in this sport or that sport, you can no longer operate as an amateur in either of those sports. But I could still play college football and be a wrestler. So that's why on the summer of, it was the summer of 75, and I went to Mid-South, and I didn't go as a referee because I had refereed the previous summer for the Funks in their territory. And that's where it all, like at the end of the summer, I called and I told everybody, I said, look, even though I've been offered this scholarship at Arizona, I'm going to go to West Texas State. And they're going, why? University of Arizona is a bigger school. It's Arizona State, used to be way up in the, what do you call it? They were one of the top teams in college football. Anyway, not Arizona State. And I said, when I tell everybody, I said, I didn't really go to West Texas State to play football. I went to West Texas State because I knew it was my inroad to becoming the professional wrestler that I wanted to be. My family's relationship with the Funk family, and we just went on and on. Terry Funk, I was watching TV one day at home. I hadn't seen any wrestling in 3 years. And it's the Funks, and they're coming to Tucson. So that's when I went to see them. Told Terry that I had signed a scholarship at Arizona. He made arrangements for the trip to West Texas State, and the rest is history.
Thank you.
Great question. Still having fun?
Yeah.
Nice. We got a few minutes here, so I'm going to hammer some more questions. So, anyone in the audience, obvious wrestling fans, when you were like younger or whatever, you know it's predetermined. They're following a script, but then you see something and you're like, but that was real. And then years later, you look back at it and you're like, why did I think that? Here's mine. Okay, this was absolute fact with my friend group when we were young. Your last match was SummerSlam against Razor Ramon. Is that the last WWF match?
I believe so.
So he gave you the Razor's Edge, and we assumed that, like, for real, that ended your career.
No.
Right?
No.
But, like, we literally thought that for the next probably decade until someone said, did that? No. But that was just absolute fact within our friend group. And it changed the way we watched Razor Ramon on TV, because he would lift someone and we'd be like, I was a big Shawn Michaels fan, and all Shawn Michaels did was take Razor's edges, and I was like, no, don't end his career too, that move's dangerous. So your timing helped get Razor Ramon over with my friends.
And I was a big fan of Shawn too. I mean, when Shawn first went to wrestling, I mean, he worked for Watts, and it didn't take me long to see, what was probably going to be ahead of him. He had to get some personal things straightened out in his life, and he did. The rest is history.
Mm-hmm. Where were you in Montreal in '97? I wasn't going to bring it up, but I kind of want to know now, because I know you're friends with Brett, you're friends with Sean. Were you just not answering your phone for a while?
Yeah.
Fair enough.
So, yeah.
All right. One of the biggest missed opportunities, I swear, that nobody talks about. First of all, SummerSlam 94, no one talks about because it was Undertaker versus Undertaker, and nobody, right, bad. But the most important thing on that show was there was this huge storyline leading up with you, where you had like the bad guys, the $1 Million Corporation. No one talks about this. And months before, Native American Tatanka came out and accused Lex Luger of selling out. And this was a big thing, man. Like, Lex Luger selling out to the $1 Million Man. And Lex Luger was this boring good guy with just muscles and no personality. And he would be like, I did not. And being wrestling, all my friends were like, well, obviously, it's going to be Tatanka that turns on Lex and actually sold out to $1 Million Man, because in wrestling, what says is going to happen, the opposite happens. And I was like, no, but this time, you're expecting that, so what doesn't, and we're all, our noses are bleeding trying to like figure out this wrestling knowledge. But I was, in my mind, I was like, that's what's missing with Lex Luger. Heel manager, Ted DiBiase, they would be so stupid not to run with this. That would be what gets Luger to be finally to that like top heel level, and instead they did the obvious. They went with Tatanka, nothing happened. Nothing happened with Luger. Luger went to WCW, nothing happened. And then they give you Stone Cold Steve Austin in that same role that I was talking about, who doesn't need a manager. So I think you would have been the key for Lex Luger's success.
Well, I appreciate that. And you know, just as in going with what you're talking about here, you know, what is a manager in wrestling? And you know, I've always said this. I said a good manager is put with a wrestler who's got good in-ring skills, but is not so good on the microphone. So that wrestler is given a mouthpiece, is given like a Jimmy Hart or whoever to do the speaking for him. And that's what makes it work.
Wrapping up, what was it like working with Sensational Sherry?
Sherry was, you know, Sherry was great. You know,
underappreciated. You look back now.
I do, and I'm going to tell you something. The other thing about Sherry is she was tough. I mean, you know, I pity the poor guy that ever tried to take advantage of her, because you know she'd beat him up. I mean, you know, she was as sweet as she could be, but Sherry was legitimately tough. I mean, that you would have to be tough to, you know, be a female wrestler. And of course, my mother also was a wrestler. So that's how she met my dad. She was her wrestling name was Helen Hild, and that's how they met. But I mean, Sherry was, you know, she was a good girl, but she was legitimately tough. I mean, I tell guys, I said, you better not, you know, F with her, she'll beat you up. And she could.
I read in Shawn Michaels' book, he said the same thing, because I think she went from you to him, if I remember correctly.
I think so.
She became his manager, and he was quite small compared to the rest of you.
Yeah.
And he would be in the ring, whatever, and he'd be like, this guy's not like selling for me or not performing the way he should. He's, you know, making me look bad. And then Sherry would be like, throw him outside. So Shawn would throw the guy outside the ring, and she would just like boot him with her shoes or like her heels as hard as she could, and be like, you know, get back in there and do your thing. Yeah. So he credits a lot of his early success to her as well.
Yeah. She was a good girl.
Nice.
Girl. Yeah.
Well, Ted, I'm looking at the time, and I guess it's up to me to clean up this money, and that's fine. Before the 3 o'clock comes. Final thoughts. Thank you so much for coming to Saskatoon to PopconYXE 2026. Anyone else want a final question for the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase, before we go? No? Last chance. Here we go. We're ending on a high note. Here you go.
Yeah, just on one of Curtis's last topics, Mr. DiBiase, and is that real or not? Bullet Barb Armstrong, as far as I know, still claims you tried to kill him in real life.
Who?
Bullet Bob Armstrong of Georgia.
That is absolutely ridiculous.
Thought you were going to say absolutely true.
No. No. That's, I mean, Sure, that's ridiculous.
Well, he went so far as to claim you disfigured his face and they rebuilt his nose using skin from his own butt.
Totally.
And he traded on that story for years on the independent circuit.
Well, everybody's got a price for the $1 million man.
I'm going to finish with a laugh. Can we count down and do a laugh to end this process? Dude, 3, and get ready with the music. Do you still have it? We're going strong.
Yeah.
Yeah? Thumbs up? Yeah? Can we end strong? Let's do it. All right. You guys ready? Let's finish with the laugh. Ladies and gentlemen, the $1 million man, Ted Dibiase. 3, 2, 1.